welcome to SVG-TV News for Tuesday, March 30th, 2021. I am Rochelle Batiste with the details. 106 emergency shelters are prepared to take in evacuees should there be an explosive eruption of La Soufrière volcano. The National Emergency Management Organization, NEMO, is ensuring everything is in place, and residents in the red and orange zones are being urged to be prepared in the event that it becomes necessary for them to evacuate at short notice. In this first part of a sit-down interview with NEMO's director, Larissa Pugsley-Kidd tells us more about NEMO's plan for the emergency shelters.
Schools and churches have been identified by the National Emergency Management Organization, NEMO, to be used as emergency shelters to house evacuees from the red and orange zones of La Soufrière volcano in the event of an explosive eruption. Kingstown has the most shelters, with 23 buildings earmarked for evacuees coming mainly from Georgetown, which is one of several communities in the red zone of the volcano. The 106 identified shelters were published last weekend, following a swarm of volcano-tectonic earthquakes recorded last Tuesday and Wednesday, sending some residents in the red zone communities into panic mode. In an interview with us today, Tuesday, March 30th, Director of NEMO Michelle Forbes noted that the emergency shelters are not hotels, so their accommodation will be different. Therefore, persons who will be evacuated to these shelters must prepare well.
Not all have the amenities as if you at home, so we have to take that into consideration. So you can take your own, sheet covering, those little things. Take some food, because ideally we may not be able to provide within a time frame. Our standard rule is that you take your own food supply to last you 2 to 3 days until the national system kicks in.
Forbes said all other health protocols will be enforced at the emergency shelters.
We are now ensuring that the shelter managers have their PPEs. When you get to the shelter, you cannot go without your mask in the first place. Everybody must wear their mask once they're in the shelter environment, of course, except if you're sleeping. We will be doing checks. The Ministry of Health will be doing their checks. Checks also testing, random testing sometimes, or in between for the COVID-19 virus. The flu-like symptoms will be put separately with the general population. That's in the school, if you're in a school environment.
The largest shelters identified can accommodate up to 200 people.
If you're going to mix with people that you're not accustomed mixing with, they're in your face, you have to use the same bathrooms, you have to use the same showers, you have to use the same facilities that everybody else is using. And, it can be quite nerve-wracking, can be taxing. We have persons who are volunteering to manage the shelters, and thanks to all of those who have really come forward to indicate that they will support in terms of being shelter managers.
Those in the danger zones who have been tested positive for COVID-19 will be provided with separate accommodation, which will be handled by the Ministry of Health.
We have identified separate shelters that will have persons who are positive, that will have them in terms of they're not mixing with the general population, but we want to have them, if they can move ahead of time, but Ministry of Health has these names.
Forbes said it is imperative that the residents in the danger zone remain on alert, noting that the volcano can give a little or no time for an evacuation order.
So things have quieted back down, but it can escalate again. So it can be up and down over a period of time.
Approximately 16,000 people live in the red and orange zones, but NEMO is catering for 20,000 people to be evacuated. It was noted that the residents in the danger zone communities also have the option of making their own housing arrangements in the yellow and green zones, which are communities from Bayabu on the windward end and Barley on the leeward side of the island. For SVG-TV News, Larissa Pugsley-Kidd.
And the NEMO director was asked how they plan to deal with persons who may refuse to leave their home even after an evacuation order has been issued. Forbes said removing someone from their home is not mandatory. However, once there is a state of emergency, everyone is expected to comply with the order, but they will not be forced to do so.
They don't plan to leave in the first phase unless there's a state of emergency. The evacuation is not mandatory. We recommend, we strongly recommend that persons do not take matters into their own and put their life at risk for evacuating. So first and first and foremost, everybody above the Regatta Ridge, once there's a potential threat or there's a threat, imminent threat of an explosive eruption, we expect you to evacuate. And of course down to Georgetown too, because it's quite just under the volcano, right down to Georgetown, a little bit going down towards Byra there.
Forbes said in the event of a disaster, in this case, it will be a volcanic eruption. Saving people's lives is a priority, but if some people do not want to leave their environment when they are asked to do so, it means they will put others at risk to save them, especially if lava flows gets in the way.
It means that if they wait too late to evacuate, no one may be able to go back to get them. Because if there's the lava flows don't come early in the early phase of the eruption most of the time, so you still have some time to get out, but we're not going to put anybody in harm's way to go back and get you if you refuse to move in the first instance. If there's a state of emergency now, then the police can actually go and ask you to can actually take you out. Of course, if you're kicking and screaming, you might not say, well, okay. These are, you know, you have accepted your risk, you have decided you're staying here, these are, you have accepted that. Don't call, you know, don't expect us to try to put our lives at risk there.
The NEMO director noted that when it comes to children's safety, they are protected by law and they would easily have them removed to safer grounds.
Under the child protection laws, whereas we can actually, when I say we, I mean the state can actually remove children for their safety, you know, and so on, and say it's a safe, you know, because you have that kind of in the child law, so your child protection law. So there are different avenues. We hope we don't have to reach the stage that we have to try to force people out, but people can understand the risk that they're living with, and will be able to do their own, evacuate on their own.
In the event of an eruption, ash clouds are expected far and wide, and neighboring St. Lucia is preparing for this and to assist evacuees from SVG if it becomes necessary. St. Lucia's National Emergency Management Organization is said to be fine-tuning its contingency plan. We hear more in this report from HTS News Force St. Lucia.
An increase in seismic activity in the past week at the St. Vincent Le Soufriere volcano, St. Lucia was contacted by the Caribbean Disaster Emergency Agency, which is SEDIMA, to determine how prepared we are in the event of an eruption. And based on the information, an eruption is imminent, but we can't tell exactly when it will happen.
In preparation for any eventuality, on Saturday, March 27th, NEMO called an emergency meeting with all stakeholders to update and plan its response to a volcanic hazard. According to Deputy Director NEMO, Maria Medad, communities in the south of St. Lucia have already been identified if an evacuation is deemed necessary.
From Dennery, as far as Soufriere. And the reason for looking at these is that we're not sure in terms of wind direction, etc., what is going to happen and how these communities will be affected.
Regarding the risk of tsunami, Medad says tidal waves associated with volcanic eruptions are rare. She also addressed volcanic ash that could affect St. Lucia's air quality and notes the hazard depends on the intensity of the eruption. St. Lucia has made known its intention to step up and assist St. Vincent in the event of a mass evacuation of Vincentians. Medad says shelters in the north of St. Lucia have already been identified for evacuees.
The shelters that they would be accessing would be treated as quarantine shelters. So they would not be able to go out and mingle with the locals on arrival. They will do the necessary quarantine period. The screening will be done with them, so that the Ministry of Health is aware of the health conditions.
In other news, the Ministry of Education is the recipient of 14 water tanks donated by the Kingston Cooperative Credit Union. At the handing over ceremony held last Friday, March 26, at Lane's Hardware at Annisvale, Minister of Education Curtis King said the tanks could not have come at a better time with the imminent eruption of the Lasso volcano looming and as the nation continues to battle the COVID-19 pandemic.
This is a magnanimous gesture on behalf of the Kingston Credit Union. The credit union, by its very nature, is a people's organization, and it promotes the whole idea of persons working together and solidarity among people. The donation is coming at a very critical time. One, we would have decided some time ago to ensure that all of our schools are equipped with the necessary water storage facility to allow school to continue whenever there is a disaster or whenever there is a lack of water present. And secondly, it is coming at a time when we are facing the threat of an explosive eruption of La Soufrière. I say this guardedly because we are still preparing for the worst but praying for the best. But nevertheless, it is always important that you're in a state of preparedness or readiness whenever you encounter these difficulties. And so these tanks will go a long way in ensuring that we have a very important and critical water supply.
Permanent Secretary in the Ministry of Education, Michael Bulk, said the donation made by KCCU is no small feat, as a recent assessment by the Ministry and Braxa identified a need for water tanks to be placed at several schools across SVG.
In its attempts to ensure that schools are ready for face-to-face engagement, conducted an assessment with the assistance of Braxa. The assessment revealed there is critical need for tanks to be used in a total of 35 schools. So this act on the part of KCCU that may seem or may appear as simple, it is something that will redound to the benefit of our nation's children. These tanks would greatly enrich the process of preparing for the volcanic eruption.
Marketing Officer of KCCU, Ruth Stowe, who officiated the ceremony, said that in prioritizing its members and by extension the Vincentian public, the credit union moved to make the donation to schools, which will be used as emergency shelters in the event of an explosive eruption of La Soufrière. CEO of KCCU, Clement Lynch, who also spoke at the handing over ceremony, said it is the pleasure of the union to partner with and support the Ministry of Education. In some COVID-19 related news, we hear that St. Vincent and the Grenadines recorded no new positive cases of COVID-19 from 79 samples collected and tested on March 28, 2021. No new recoveries were reported, leaving the number of total recoveries at 1,587. 142 cases remain active and 10 persons with COVID-19 have died. 1,739 cases of COVID-19 have been reported in St. Vincent and the Grenadines since March 2020. The public is urged to continue to use masks, sanitize, physically distance, and get vaccinated to reduce the spread of COVID-19 here in SVG. The St. Vincent and the Grenadines Public Service Union has denounced the government's policy on vaccination and testing of public sector workers, which is expected to come into effect on April 5, 2021. Last Friday, government officials, led by Acting Prime Minister Montgomery Daniel, held a meeting with representatives of the various trade unions to discuss the policy, which the PSU, the Teachers Union, and the Police Welfare Association all deem as ill-advised. In an interview today with SVG-TV News, President of the PSU, Elroy Boucher, says while no representative of the PSU was present at the meeting due to miscommunication, they were fully briefed on the meeting and they have come to the conclusion that the government is infringing on the rights of intentions with the new policy.
This position by the government is unreasonable, arbitrary, and an infringement on the rights of public officers. Based on what we have been informed by our colleagues, the unions were advised that the public service would be among the group of persons who will be required to get vaccinated, and those who do not wish to be vaccinated will be required to take a COVID test every 2 weeks. In addition, I think it was also mentioned that failure to comply with either or would result in disciplinary procedures according to Section 50 and 51 of the Public Service Regulations, which is hinting at the fact that disciplinary measures will be taken against you. Suspension, a reduction in rank, monies being taken out of your pay.
Boucher said the PSU held a meeting with its membership on Monday evening, and public servants are strongly against the government's vaccination and testing policy. He noted that even persons who have taken the vaccine do not support the policy. He added that the union is not against vaccination and has been actively encouraging members to get vaccinated. However, the government's latest move to get persons vaccinated is ill-advised and counterproductive to the present vaccination campaign, noting that once persons feel forced, a pushback can be expected.
The consensus was crystal clear. We are opposed to government trying to force us to be vaccinated. We are opposed to government as a result of us, those who may not want to take a vaccine, to be subjected to a PCR test every 2 weeks. In my view, albeit an irrational move, it's really ill-advised. And I must say, the Public Service Union is not against vaccination, because we have promoted vaccination. We have urged our members on numerous occasions to take the vaccine. Persons have to make informed decisions. They have to be comfortable taking the vaccine. And I'm sure that, by and large, workers will eventually do that. There's the other vaccine that is on the market, the Sputnik. And there are a lot of people who have gravitated towards that. So it is not an anti-vax issue. And government just need to be patient in this regard.
And given his alternative to the government's policy, the PSU president said a more feasible approach could be the random testing of persons in the various government departments over time to ensure the environment is safe. He noted that since public servants have returned to work in full, there have been no outbreaks of the viral illness, as persons have been adhering to the protocols.
If testing by itself is a public health measure, take it away from this threat that you have. Let's suppose it's standalone. Then I see no difficulty in having random testing in departments. Because if you have a department that has 15 persons and they are in close contact with each other, albeit they are following the protocols, but you want to gauge whether the virus is among the workers in that department, I see no difficulty in taking a sampling of the department. So if you want to tell me every 2 weeks you sample different units, different departments to gauge what is happening, I mean, that's reasonable, okay? And that to me is a public health measure to help you assess the spread of COVID-19 within the public service. But like I say, we have had no outbreaks since we have gone back to work.
President of the Police Welfare Association, Brenton Smith, echoed the sentiments expressed by Boucher and said a meeting will be held with the PWA membership this evening.
From an executive level, we are not against vaccination, but that must be an individual choice between members. The members must have appreciation that whatever is being injected in their body must be from their choice or from the choice of their physician. You understand? The physician should give them permission if they agree to the physician advice, and so be it. But what I have a problem with is if you are saying that it must happen, otherwise you cannot enter into the workforce. The other thing is as well, why should we be subjected to undergo a test every 2 weeks? That is not fair. So we are against that totally, but we're not against vaccination for sure.
A letter encouraging further dialogue between the government and the various unions was reportedly delivered today. Boucher said if the government chooses not to engage favorably with the unions, they plan to stand together to fight for the rights of their members, although he would like to see the situation resolved to the benefit of all, noting now is not the time to fight. In other news, Minister of Agriculture Saboto Caesar said his ministry is taking steps to reduce the country's food import bill at $2 million by encouraging a greater level of productivity among local farmers. He was speaking at a recent handing over of project assets from the Taiwan Technical Mission to the Ministry of Agriculture.
Very important that our farmers appreciate that we would want idle lands to come under production for many of these commodities which we currently import. To import $500,000 worth of Irish potato into this country, it's simply too much. We want to be able to reduce the importation of Irish potato by doing two things principally. One, growing a percentage of those potatoes here, and two, substitute the consumption of a significant percentage of those potatoes by replacing it with other local commodities. And I know that the persons in the culinary arts area who he have already engaged are doing excellent work to advise us accordingly.
Minister Caesar said despite progress made over the years, the country's food import bill remains high and that his ministry will be focusing on specific foods which can be produced locally.
When we complete the task of setting up the framework for the production of more potatoes, we are going to address the issue of the food import bill segments for onions, for carrots, and a list of vegetables. We have already earmarked several areas in the country. We have engaged the tissue culture lab because it is very important that we give farmers the best and the cleanest material available.
The Agriculture Minister said this year also the ministry will be implementing a food market stabilization program to provide readily available markets for farmers for their produce.
This year, we are carrying out the food market stabilization program. And in this, we are having a matchmaking between producers and consumers. Already, throughout every village in St. Vincent and the Grenadines, you have persons collecting the information about what the farmers are growing. And this information will be provided through a directory to all and sundry so that we can address the very important issue of marketing.
For a second consecutive year, the Bequia Easter Regatta has been cancelled due to the COVID-19 pandemic, and the economic impact is said to be far-reaching. So says member of the Bequia Easter Regatta Committee, Rory King, during a telephone interview with SVG-TV News. The regatta usually starts on Good Friday, with the small Grenadine island buzzing with activities over a 4-day period. King said the second year of no regatta has left them dejected.
It will have a very negative and our little economy, where we, people that look forward to Easter weekend to have little functions, and even the icebox people, the vendors and stuff like that, with the influx of people we have on the island. They don't do a little business with the icebox, but that thing happened this year, so everybody can feel the pinch. People have their craft and stuff like that to sell on Bequia. Everybody, feeling the downturn of this COVID epidemic that we have in. So.
King said the tourism sector continues to suffer, with persons forced to find other means to earn a livelihood. He said personally he has been affected by the downturn.
I'm not only involved in Bequia Sailing Club, I'm involved in a small portion of the tourism sector where I have a boat that is deliver fuel and water and ice to the yachts and stuff like that. I ain't doing business since last year. The boat just more or less. I got like $6,000 worth of fuel on board, and nobody to sell it to. I'm full of water, nobody to sell it to. It's been dead since last year.
Optimistic about the future, King said they are now looking forward to a sailing weekend in Bequia in October as part of SVG's independence celebrations.
I think our last chance for any sailing event would be for independence. If things come back to any normalcy between now and at least a month before, like September, things looking different for September, then we could probably put together a small weekend of sailing for the independence weekend.